Every kid in this show is real. Every story is true. And everything you're about to hear really happened. It's 2008 in South Philadelphia. Picture it. Row houses standing shoulder to shoulder. Red brick, white steps out front. A basketball hoop nailed up over practically every garage door on the block. And tucked into one of the neighborhood parks, a baseball field. Nothing fancy, just grass and dirt and a chain-link backstop. The kind of field where every kid in the neighborhood has probably scraped a knee at some point. That's where Monet Davis grew up. And on the particular afternoon our story starts, she was 7 years old. And she was sitting on a bench, bored out of her mind. Her older cousin had baseball practice that day, which meant Monet had to come along and just wait. And you know that kind of waiting, right? Where somebody else gets to do the fun thing and you're just sitting there watching with nothing to do. Well, Monet was not a great sit-and-wait kid. Never really had been. So, at some point, she got up, found a football lying in the grass, and started throwing it around with some boys who were hanging out nearby. Totally normal. Kids do this at every park in America, every single day, and nobody thinks twice about it. Except this one time, somebody did think twice about it. See, there was a man standing off to the side. His name was Steve Bandura. And Steve basically ran that whole rec center. Coached basketball there, coached baseball there. Had probably watched, 10,000 kids throw 10,000 balls over the years he'd been doing this. He wasn't even there to scout anybody that day. He was just standing around, waiting for his own practice to start, when something caught his eye. Now here's the thing he noticed. It's small, but hold on to it. Because this entire story is going to turn out to be about this one small thing, over and over, in a bunch of different shapes. Most kids, when you hand them a ball, want to throw it as hard as they possibly can. That's just the instinct. And when you throw as hard as you can, the ball usually goes somewhere. High, into the bushes, skipping off the ground 3 feet in front of your friend. Throwing hard and throwing well are two completely different skills. And almost nobody has both of them at 7 years old. But every time Monet threw that football, it landed exactly where the other kids' hands already were. Every single time. She wasn't trying to throw it as far as she could. She was trying to throw it exactly where she was aiming. So, Steve walked over, asked her name, asked if she played basketball. Yeah, she said. Want to come play on my team? Steve asked. She said yes before he even finished asking. But then, almost like it was an afterthought, like he was already walking away and just turned back to add one more thing. He asked her the question that actually starts this whole story. Hey, have you ever thought about baseball? Why not, Monet thought. So, she gave baseball a try. And almost nothing about it made sense to her at first. Have you ever tried a brand new sport and everybody around you already seemed to speak this whole secret language? Cut-off throw, back up the base, force play. Monet would nod along like she understood exactly what was happening, but she absolutely did not. The glove, it felt too big, and she had to remember which base was which. It was a lot, especially when you're starting from zero. And she really was starting from zero. Before that summer, Monet Davis had never once thrown a baseball in her life. But that didn't matter now. And then one day, it was her turn to pitch. Pitching is a strange job if you think about it. You're the one player who's involved in nearly every single moment of the game. Every play starts with your arm. It's a lot of responsibility to hand a kid. But Monet, she looked in toward the catcher, pulled her arm back, and threw. The ball went exactly where she was aiming. The next one did too. And the one after that. Coach Steve, he'd seen this before, 3 months earlier, on a football field, from a 7-year-old who was only trying to kill time waiting for her cousin. And here, here it was again. She wasn't chasing speed, she was chasing exactness. And it turns out, on a pitcher's mound, exactness is worth more than almost anything else in the whole game. Now, I want to tell you something true that might surprise you, because it would be really easy to make this sound like Monet fell in love with baseball on day one and never looked back. But that's not quite how it went. And honestly, the real version is a better story. The truth is, Monet loved basketball. She loved the noise of a gym, the squeak of sneakers, the way you never really stop moving. And for a while, basketball just started eating up more and more of her time. The way one thing quietly crowds out another when you're not paying attention. Baseball practice would come around and she'd rather be somewhere else instead. There were whole stretches where it genuinely looked like baseball would be a sport she used to play. Coach Steve noticed. He didn't give a big speech about wasted potential or anything like that. He just asked her one simple question at practice, like it was nothing. He asked, "Are you going to come back?" That's it. That was the whole conversation. The coach asking a player if she'll show up next week. Monet thought about it for a second, and she came back. I'm telling you this because it matters later. She almost put the ball down for good, but she picked it back up anyway, when nobody was making her. Years went by, one baseball season sliding into the next. Monet kept playing with her hometown team, and she kept doing the one thing that had gotten her noticed in the first place, throwing exactly where she was aiming. Over and over, thousands of times, until it wasn't a trick anymore. It was just who she was on a mound. By the summer she turned 13, this is 2014 now, all that practice had turned into something genuinely remarkable. She could throw a baseball 70 miles an hour. That's about how fast cars go on the highway. And she could still put it almost exactly where she wanted. Here's what that means if you're the batter. In Little League, the pitcher only stands 46 feet away from you. That's about the length of a school bus. At 70 miles an hour, from 46 feet, you have well under half a second to decide whether you're even going to swing. Almost nobody her age could do what Monet could do. And it turns out, the kind of people whose job it is to notice things like that, they started noticing her. That summer, her team started winning. At first, almost nobody outside their families noticed. I mean, a neighborhood Little League team winning games isn't exactly breaking news, but they kept winning. One round, then the next round, then the round after that, and week by week, the crowds at their games kept getting just a little bit bigger. Pretty soon, there were neighbors showing up with lawn chairs who didn't even have a kid on the team. They just wanted to see this team from South Philly that couldn't seem to lose. By the time they reached the Mid-Atlantic Regional Tournament, which meant an actual bus ride all the way out to Bristol, Connecticut, this wasn't a neighborhood team having a nice season anymore. This was a genuinely great baseball team, one win away from the biggest stage there is in Little League. The Little League World Series, on national television, watched by millions of people. Yeah, one win away. That's the game I want to tell you about now. Monet walked out to the mound against the team from Delaware, and I want you to know something before I tell you what happened. In this game, she didn't do anything different. Same windup she'd always had. Same slow breath before the pitch. Same look toward the catcher that she'd had since she was 7 years old, throwing a football to some kid she just met. Strike. Then another pitch. Strike. And another. Strike. Inning after inning went by like that, and Delaware just could not get the ball past her. Not a single run. Not even close to one. When the last out landed in a glove, the scoreboard still read exactly what it had read on Delaware's side the entire game. 0. That's called a shutout. It means the other team never crossed home plate. Not one single time the whole game. Remember that small thing Steve noticed on the football field all those years ago? Here it is, fully grown. A 13-year-old had just pitched one of the hardest kinds of games there is to pitch. She hadn't done it by throwing harder than everybody else on that field. She'd done it the same way she always had, throwing exactly where she was aiming. And they won. Big time. And that meant one thing. They were headed to the Little League World Series. Fast forward to Williamsport, Pennsylvania. It's Friday, August 15th, 2014. If you've never heard of it, Williamsport is this small town tucked into the hills that turns into the center of the entire baseball universe for 2 weeks every August. That's where the Little League World Series is played. Same stadium every year. Same hill behind the outfield where thousands of families spread out blankets because there isn't even enough seating for everyone who wants to come. And on this particular Friday, every single one of those seats in that whole hill were full. Monet's first World Series game against Nashville, Tennessee, a team that had beaten everybody in their path to get there. By this point, word had already traveled, not just around Williamsport, around the whole country. There's a girl pitching today. People who had never met Monet Davis, who lived nowhere near Philadelphia, had heard there was a 13-year-old girl about to take the mound in a stadium that in 67 years had almost never seen one. So when the announcer read her name before the game even started, the whole place stood up, cheering for a kid who hadn't thrown a single pitch yet. Now, Monet admitted afterward that she was nervous, really nervous. All those people, her first time ever standing on that particular mound in that particular stadium with that many eyes on her at once. If you'd been standing next to her in the dugout, I don't think you'd have blamed her one bit for being scared. But she walked out there anyway, towed the rubber, looked in at her catcher, took that same breath she always took, and threw the ball. First pitch, strike. The crowd, this whole stadium full of strangers, made a sound like they couldn't quite believe what they'd just seen. Next batter, same thing, strike. And the next, strike. Inning after inning, Nashville sent their best hitters up to the plate, and inning after inning, Monet did the exact same thing she'd been doing since she was 7 years old on a football field when nobody was watching. She wasn't overpowering anybody. She was putting the ball exactly, precisely where she meant to put it. And against hitters this good, that turned out to be more than enough. By the 6th inning, she had struck out 8 batters. She had not walked a single one. Nashville's whole lineup had barely managed to touch her. And when the final inning winded down and the score was settled, it was 4-0. Monet's team had won. And that's when the stadium announcer said something that had never once been said in the 67-year history of the Little League World Series. A girl had just thrown a shutout. Not almost. Not the first girl to come close. The actual first one ever to walk off that mound having thrown a complete, spotless. Nothing got past her game in front of the entire country. Think back for a second to that football on a Philadelphia playground, to Coach Steve just standing there, noticing the way it landed exactly where it was supposed to. 6 years. That's all it took to get from that quiet little moment nobody else even saw to this. A whole stadium on its feet and a scoreboard that read 0. What happened over the next few days, I can really only describe as the entire country losing its mind in the best way possible. Major league players, grown men, professionals, people Monet had only ever watched on television were suddenly posting about her. Talk show hosts were calling, wanting her on their couches, and then Sports Illustrated, the single most famous sports magazine in America, put her on their cover. In 60 years of that magazine existing, out of the millions of kids who had ever played Little League, not one of them had ever appeared on that cover while they were still actually playing. Monet Davis, from a rec center in South Philly, was the first. Somebody asked her, in the middle of all that noise, how it felt. And I love her answer, because underneath everything happening around her, you can still hear an actual 13-year-old kid. She said, "It's very unreal. I never thought at the age of 13 I would be a role model." Now, I have to tell you about the very next big game. And I'm going to tell it to you straight, because it's true, and because it matters a lot to the rest of this story. 5 days later, in the semifinals, against a really strong team from Nevada, with more people watching than I'd ever watched a Little League game on television before, Monet just didn't have it that day. It happens to every pitcher who's ever played. Sometimes the ball won't listen, no matter how carefully you're aiming. Nevada's hitters found her. She didn't even make it out of the third inning. Her team lost, and their World Series run was over. On the single biggest stage of her whole life, in front of more people than she may ever pitch in front of again, Monet Davis lost. And here's the part I really want you to think about. The order all of this happened in, the magazine cover, the whole country falling in love with her, all of that came before this loss, not after. She'd already been declared a star, and then she went out and had a genuinely bad day in front of every single person who had just decided to adore her. But you know what? The story didn't stop there. It just kept going, which is what great stories do. After the Little League World Series, Monet went back home, back to regular life, school, homework, basketball season. A few weeks after the World Series, she and her teammates traveled to the Basketball Hall of Fame to donate the jersey she'd worn during that shutout. It lives there permanently now, not too far from things that once belonged to Babe Ruth and Jackie Robinson. And when it came time for college, something a little strange happened. Strange for somebody with her talent, anyway. There wasn't a women's professional baseball league to dream toward. There wasn't even college baseball for women. Girls who played baseball growing up were expected to just switch over to a different game called softball, with a bigger ball and a smaller field. So, Monet went to Hampton University and played softball. She was good at it too. But she was honest, saying she never loved it the way she loved baseball. So, she went and focused on some other things. A journalism degree, broadcasting work with ESPN, a video production internship with the Los Angeles Dodgers. Then, on top of all that, a master's degree from Columbia University in the business of sports. Her old coach, Steve, had told her something once, years earlier, and it stuck with her more than almost anything else from that whole famous summer. He said, "Don't let 13 be the peak of your life." Well, a couple years ago, something happened that hadn't happened in America in more than 70 years. Somebody announced they were building a professional baseball league. This time, for women. Real teams, real contracts, real baseball, not softball. The door that had never existed for Monet, or any other girl who loved the sport of baseball, that door was being built. Monet Davis was 24 years old by then. She had the degrees. She had a good, stable job. Genuinely, nobody would have blamed her one bit for just staying exactly where she was. But she went to try out anyway. In November, the league held its very first draft, and with the 10th overall pick, the team from Los Angeles chose Monet Davis. In December, she signed her contract. So, right now, while you're listening to this, Monet Davis is a professional baseball player, and the league's very first season has just begun. So, let's go all the way back to where this whole thing actually started. Not the shutout, not the magazine cover. A bored 7-year-old throwing a football back and forth with some kids she just met. Not trying to throw it as far as she could, trying to throw it exactly where she was aiming. That, it turns out, is the whole story, told over and over again in different shapes. A pitcher who chose being exact over being fast and became historic because of it. A kid who almost let baseball go and picked it back up anyway when nobody was making her. A 13-year-old who had the worst day of her whole career 5 days after the best one, and just kept going. A 24-year-old with every reason in the world to stay comfortable, who went to the tryout anyway. None of that is really about throwing hard. It's about aiming carefully, and then going and getting exactly what you aimed for, even if it takes 18 years. So, don't let 13 be the peak of your life. Don't let any single day be the peak of your life. The best days you've had are just the beginning. This has been another episode of The Kid Who Did What?, where every story is about a real kid. Everything in today's episode comes from true accounts of Mo'ne Davis's history-making shutout at the Little League World Series. Parents, you'll find all of our sources in the show notes. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time for another episode of The Kid Who Did What?